There's so much we don't have to guess about. We have been given significance, and Jesus points us to the symbols. And I love tracing all the words every time they're used back to discover, as I've spent my faith in my Bible study, beyond what I've been taught by those that can teach. But I always look to see the personal description of the people and did my backtracking from the 7 letters. I wanted to spend some time on the significance of the sign of the Son of Man and the star. That he holds the 7 stars in his hand and what stars have to mean. I think the basic description that really helps kindly unify and bring people back down to earth, since they've gotten so far out with these giant studies and aliens and things that, were before history. The simplest explanation, I think, is how that God gives it the overall pattern. And when we look at the way that actual land was split up, given God's attention through this family. And we look over their heads, and they all carry a banner. They all had those disciplines that we're teaching from these ancient ones. So they had their disciplines, whether they were artificers and metallurgies or what their particular disciplines were. They had that banner over their head. And we have that attachment of God's attention to government, specifically spelled out for us. So you have a banner over a government or else a flag. And he describes those flags again in the use of a ship with a sail. So those flags determine a direction, and that helps us navigate the symbols of the difference between oceans and ships and rivers and streams. But here you have a government with a flag over it that's also under the stars. Then he begins to tell us how that those disciplines are work, and how that all of that work is a hammer. So we have the situation of dividing government in its place with God when the prince of the people, the bloodline right, to govern comes out of Egypt and says, well, we're just thirsty. Moses doesn't know what he's doing, and you're prince, you lead us. And of course, when he tried to offer prayer, that had to be hammered and placed over the fire, which shows us work, and that the altar is our work and time passing here in the world. The world is God's altar. But you have, here these men are, and all this work and all this hammering, and those are your carpenters and founders and your 4 horsemen. This is what they're doing. It isn't just carpenters with wood. These are artificers that are building. They're builders. So they hammer out in all these great disciplines and pass on these trades, and they hammer out their work, and then all the money collects together and is smelted, hammered out, and spread over an image, which would be your design of government. That would be your paperwork infrastructure of what you believed in and how you organized it. You have this image of government, and all this gold hammered out around it thin, like electronic or electroplated gold. And in the end, the whole story given in this whole soliloquy of what this is like, that the image is the image of worldly man. And we get usage when we're talking about end times of places, because it is a place that's coming to us and unifying us back together. They're in it. and that this idea of God within the names of those towns are a reference to worldly good. And you get right back down. Every time you get more correct about prophecy, you find the difference between the divine and the worldly. And this message does that too. Come up here and see Jesus with me. Come on. Come on. So the image is of a man, and that he reminds us that all worldly good is in him, so that we don't get confused. You're not going to work your way to heaven, and you can't build a temple to get there. So we have these two particular groups, and I've loved and enjoyed finding where that I have been wrong, but I don't ever really look at it that way. Learned more about a correct way to see about Dan and Ephraim, and how that idols knocked them out of being sealed. It didn't knock them out of heaven, but it knocked them out of being able to see the latter-day rays and the burden that he gives us to identifying the enemy and seeing these things happening around us so that we can make choices. Once you're saved, you have no other burden except there's a thief in the night and the candlestick that might get removed. So no other burden is on you but this recognition of evil working in a global takeover and in prophecy and the consummation, the fulfillment of the Hosanna are gathered back in. So he did. You know, if any preacher wants to tell you weren't supposed to study these things, well, he's just not really looking at everything Jesus said. And the last letters he gave us are his last love, reaching through time back to John. So I've just always just found those so precious. But that Dan and Ephraim spell out what goes wrong with the church and how it hands over its authority in the last days. Because what Dan did was go to someone who did make temple furniture and had him some temple furniture items. Now, I have looked into it. I couldn't tell you exactly what they were, and I don't think it's completely 100% able to be pinned down. But that he made a replica, and he took it in and he made a system that people had to follow. And it wasn't just God, it was just demanding religious rights. And in that way, the obedience of the people. So this is the ism, whether it's communism or whatever, I call it dragonism, because this practice was taught in star teaching and giant teaching and all these secret things we're all going through right now. Even the dragon, when you look at the dragon, everything about the dragon is trying to get you to see the Father. And there's where your founders are. Christians are not so much worried about that as they are understanding the difference between Cain and Jesus and what is hidden in the Lamb. So I'd like to move into that, because if you do not understand, there is no sex in heaven. But everything that he tells us about what happened, the tree of good and evil, has sexual connotations, even when they refer back to it in the New Testament. This seduction of Eve is right on the verge, it's only used sexually, right on the verge of rape, and several things about that are puzzling when you realize there's no sex in heaven. But then to immediately take that sin that can't be there, and they lost their covering and had to become flesh. You find when Cain, when she's in labor and she has Cain and Abel, you don't find this in her other pregnancies. She had a child and continued in labor. These two children